Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of the Practice Squad podcast. I'm John Vogel.
I'm Mark Petrito.
And today we're going to be covering a couple things, but the primary theme of this episode is going to be covering Mark and I's top 5 players at key positions. As much as I'd like to act like I'm super informed about inside linebackers and safeties, unfortunately, those didn't make the list. So today we will be covering wide receivers, quarterbacks, defensive linemen, tight ends, and running backs. Before we do that, though, I do want to cover a couple news events. The first of which is that I think we've officially confirmed with the Rams signings this week that the salary cap isn't real. Making Stafford one of the, I think, top 5 highest paid quarterbacks in the league, most guaranteed money out of any wide receiver to Cooper Kupp, and giving Aaron Donald a $40 million raise over 3 years. And then on top of it, they went out and got Bobby Wagner this year. They got Allen Robinson this year. They're probably still have cap space for Odell Beckham. I don't get how you do it. It's supreme accounting gymnastics. And honestly, I'm just curious about how this is going to change the league going forward. Because the Saints have been doing this for a while, and every year they're like, oh, you're going to have to, the bill's going to come due eventually, Saints. And instead, they were $70 million over the cap to start this offseason. And then they ended up with $22 million of extra cap room by the time they did all of their accounting and legal and contract gymnastics. So, Mark, what's your take on that for free agency, for, veteran players, for all of this?
Well, I think first and foremost, you got to give credit to the Rams front office. You got to give credit to these players and their agents. And obviously, McVay has a role in it as well. But to be able to win the Super Bowl with that super team that they had, it wasn't cheap. Those guys were already paid for the most part. Stafford especially, Aaron Donald especially. Cooper Kupp just got paid big time. But they already were paid a lot of money. And then to be able to bring them back and give them even more money and add players. I mean, Allen Robinson's not cheap. Bobby Wagner is one of arguably the top linebacker in the NFL. He's not cheap. And then you have a chance to sign, it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, Odell Beckham was just at McVay's wedding this past weekend. It sounds like he's going to be a Ram again moving forward. So you got to give them credit for being able to pull that off. Again, like you, I don't understand the math there. You hear all these teams every single year having cap issues, the Cowboys, the Saints, as you previously mentioned. The Rams somehow have beat the system, have beat this cap ideology. I don't know. I don't know how they're doing it. I'd love to look into the numbers, but I don't think you and I are smart enough to figure that out, John.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, because it is Kupp's getting paid $20 million, Stafford's getting paid, I believe, around $30 million, and Aaron Donald's getting paid $30 million. The cap is $205 million roughly this year?
Yeah.
And you have 3 players this year being tendered $80 million.
Again, it goes back, I guess, to our point we made in the first episode of knowing where you want to spend your money and where you want to spend, most of your investment, and then having those role player guys that maybe they're not the best at their position, but they get the job done, right? It's about winning games. That's the bottom line. So if you're able to have superstar players that help you win games and then good enough players to do the other things that you need, that's what the Rams were able to do last year, and that's what they're obviously planning on doing this year with these contract extensions and increase in payments.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you, but at the same time, Cam Akers is, no mid-tier running back in my opinion. Their offensive line looks great. And then they have Jalen Ramsey. There's not a ton of positions outside of, all the ones we're talking about that are just those role players. And it's when you have, Aaron Donald, Bobby Wagner, and Jalen Ramsey all in the same defense,
those are arguably, John, and, we'll get into our position rankings here in just a few minutes. Those are arguably the top players at each of their respective positions. And they have them all in the same defense.
It's unbelievable. It really is. I think in a lot of ways, and we discussed this in the last episode, I think the Rams are a prominent Super Bowl favorite to run it back again this year. So yeah, it's some interesting stuff. And I think it's going to change the dynamic of, I've never seen a free agency like this in my entire life, and I don't think this is going to stop because people realize, you do some crazy gymnastics with the salary cap, and everything works out at the end of the day.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
And then the other topic that I want to move on to, and we don't have to talk on this, a ton, but this whole Deshaun Watson situation is just crazy to me. And, I think that it's plausible that this goes down as the worst business deal in all of sports history. I mean, he became the highest paid guaranteed quarterback in the league with a really slimy contract, in my opinion, because they structured the contract to protect him from suspensions or further allegations. And then, there's a legitimate possibility that this dude doesn't play ever again. Suspended this year for sure, I'm thinking. But, depending on the severity of some of these allegations, I don't know if he's ever going to come back. So you gave away all this draft capital. You screwed over your quarterback that really started bringing winning back for the Browns for the first time in decades. And then you make this business transaction that is just horrible. So
it's I couldn't agree more. It's getting uglier by the day. I just saw in the news yesterday that the Texans organization is getting brought into the lawsuit. It's going to be bad for the Browns, and I think they're probably already starting to regret it. They claimed that they did their research and were very sure, obviously, in their opinion, that he was innocent of these crimes. Obviously, they wouldn't have done what they did money-wise if they were unsure of that. But if he is found guilty for these crimes, which are awful, he will not play again in the NFL. They will make an example out of him, as they've done in previous years with previous players. And this is going to be one of the, like you said, worst free agency contract negotiated moves in all of sports history, let alone just the NFL. So,
and I hate the precedent it sets too.
It's terrible because the NFL has been doing everything they can since the Ray Rice thing to fight, being a bad person, doing bad things off the field, not letting your talent and your God-given ability become more important than, you're not above the law. You're not above, morals, right? And that's what the NFL has been trying to prove and show through the last few years. But when stuff like this happens, I mean, the bottom line is the NFL is $1 billion business, and Deshaun Watson's going to win you games if he plays football for you. So
Right.
The Browns, I hope they're right. I hope he's innocent. I hope all of this stuff is, dropped. I hope that this was just all false accusations and that none of those things happened. But, it's not looking that way.
No, definitely not. And there's a difference between criminal and civil suits, but the criminal suits is just if you have criminal suits pending, you can't play in the league. I believe that was a rule that was established quite a few years ago. But that doesn't change the fact that if he's found guilty of any number of these civil suits, that's still very serious, right? I mean, I think these, originally were viewed as like misconduct allegations, but the more that you read the details, especially of these newer allegations that are coming out, they sound significantly more serious than misconduct. So I guess we'll leave it at that, but it's just, I think the Browns totally chose their fate here. And I think that they're going to bear the brunt of this decision for a long time in a negative way. I don't think it's going to lead to additional wins had they just stayed course with a healthier, Baker Mayfield next year. So,
yeah, I agree, man.
Anyways, on a lighter note than that, we're going to move on to our position rankings here. So we're just going to quickly kind of present our top 5 with, maybe very brief explanations on each. And then we're going to put up a slide to compare the two and kind of discuss, where those nuances lie. It's worth noting that if you are listening on Spotify, might be a better YouTube episode. So I apologize if that's the case, but we will do our best to also, talk through this to the best of our abilities.
John, before we get into it too, I just want to say we got a lot of positive feedback from our first episode, and John and I and Zach really appreciate any feedback that we got, and we're really happy that some people liked it and people tuned in, and we hope to continue doing that and growing our audience and having more people watch every single episode. And we just want to say thanks for listening, and really makes us happy that we're doing it.
Yeah, and anybody that lends us our ears for their ears for a long amount of time is we very much appreciate. And not only that, but it's the middle of the off season, so the fact that you're even taking the time to listen to literally just pure speculation right now is pretty awesome. And I think that as we roll into the actual season, we're going to get pretty entertaining here when it comes to guests and just weekly topics to talk about and things like that. So very quickly, past performance for this ranking list is completely irrelevant. We are purely talking about how we think these athletes are going to perform come the 2022-2023 NFL season. So worth noting, if your favorite player, your favorite vet isn't on this list, the reason why is because maybe they're a little bit past their prime and we're not taking what they did 5 years ago into account. So without further ado, my fifth favorite receiver is Tyreek Hill. I think his speed is absolutely game changing, and I think that he's going to be a great fit at the Dolphins for that reason, because I think that it's going to open up a lot of options for Tua's shorter passing game because of his ability to stretch the field. The next is Ja'Marr Chase. I think he had probably the best offensive rookie season out of anybody. I mean, he's just absolutely incredible. Talking about somebody that can stretch the field, he's definitely way up there. And as the Bengals continue to get assets, I think it's only going to get better. Next is Deebo Samuel. I think he's a generational talent. I think that even though he's a wide receiver, he reminds me a lot of Barry Sanders and just how elusive he is. I just think that he has an incredible vision and he knows where to find gaps in the defense, and it's incredible to watch. Next would be Cooper Kupp. I'm not a wide receiver, but for my personal opinions, he's just the most complete receiver in the league. He runs amazing routes. He has great hands. He's very well studied. His football IQ is through the roof. It's super awesome. And then finally, Devontae Adams. And, I think he's all of the same reasons that Cooper Kupp is an amazing receiver as he is, but he has just, touch more speed, touch more finesse, and he's just absolutely incredible. Mark?
So here's my top 5 receivers. So number 5, I'm going to have Justin Jefferson, young guy, similar to having, John had Ja'Marr Chase on his list. Justin Jefferson, another one of those LSU products. He's still young, still has a lot to prove, but in his first couple of years, changed the game, changed the league. He's playing with Kirk Cousins as his quarterback and still putting up astronomical numbers. And for a young guy to come in and make the impact that he made with Adam Thielen, who's on his team, who could arguably be in this list as well, to come in and just basically take over the number 1 receiver spot says enough. Number 4, I have Stephon Diggs, who a former Viking, who ended up being kind of traded for that pick that they got Justin Jefferson with. Funny how those guys are ending up 4 and 5 here, but Stephon Diggs, great route runner, great hands, can take the top off the defense, playing with Josh Allen this year, who I think is going to reach a new high. They're going to be an absolutely deadly duo, and I'm excited to see what they're able to do in Buffalo. Number 3, I got Tyreek Hill. He might not be as polished of a receiver. He's a unique style of player, but his speed and quickness is like something we've never seen before in the NFL. He has done it for 3 or 4 years in a row now. And I think going to Miami, he's going to continue to do it. Tua's going to benefit having him there greatly, and they're going to put up phenomenal numbers. Number 2, similar to John, I have Cooper Kupp. Guy came onto the scene this past year, but he's been doing it for a few years. This was just the year that it really all came together for him. Having Stafford obviously helped. They're going to be even better next year. He's going to be even better next year. He's Mr. Consistent, Mr. Reliable. He doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't drop the ball. He doesn't ever run the wrong route. He'll always be open. That's a quarterback's dream, and that's why he's up there, and he could arguably be number 1 on most people's lists. And then just like John, same top 2, we have Devontae Adams. A lot of people could argue, right, that for this season, not having Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback, maybe he shouldn't be the number 1 spot. I think he's going to be even better for the Raiders with Derek Carr. This is a guy he has chemistry with. They played college ball together. He's going to make an absolute impact in that division. He's going to shake everything up. His routes, his releases are the best in the NFL. He's impossible to play press or off coverage with. I mean, he's an unguardable guy. And, Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, will say it. Derek Carr is a lucky man to have him join up.
So taking a look at our lists here, very similar. I would say that Justin Jefferson definitely would be an honorable mention for me. I mean, he's got so much potential. I would say just him and Jamar are very similar receivers, and I think Jamar, maybe has a higher ceiling just with a very competent quarterback in Joe Burrow.
Make a note that it's crazy that those two were Joe Burrow's receivers on the LSU team.
I mean, seriously, it makes all the sense in the world that they were as dominant as they were. And I think the reason that Devontae is probably above Cooper Kupp in both of our heads, or I don't want to speak for you, Mark, is like his supporting cast is just going to be excellent there, but it's not so great that I think he's going to be like losing targets as a result, right? I mean, Kupp, it's just every single person on that team is a weapon. It's amazing. It's actually unbelievable. I know that we've talked about the Rams roster at length already between these two episodes, but it's just between Waller, it's just going to be a problem with
Renfrow too. And me and John were talking about this. Obviously I'm not going to put Renfrow in my top 5 receivers, but in terms of route running, me and John were texting and talking about this before the episode. He's right there in the top 5 in terms of just route running, but Hunter Renfrow is going to have a huge year this year because he's going to see man-to-man coverage on safeties or linebackers every snap because Devontae is going to draw so much attention. Darren Waller is going to draw so much attention. Hunter Renfrow, if you're a fantasy guy, if you're a fantasy, league type owner or player, draft him. He will be your guy. He'll be a top receiver for sure. But like you said, John, I think another reason we have Devontae Adams ahead of Cooper Kupp is he's in a new system, right? So it's harder to figure out exactly how they're going to utilize him. Cooper Kupp, the Rams are going to try to use him the same way they did last year, and all of that's on film. So teams are prepping for that right now. Devontae Adams it's all new. So, and that you can't prepare for that chemistry that they already have with Derek Carr and him. It's going to be, a highly competitive debate, but that's why I gave it to Devontae Adams, and I think part of the reason you did as well.
Yeah, that's a great consideration, though, and something I didn't even think about is, new system. They don't know exactly how it's going to be utilized. It's going to be hard to adjust for. So that's a great point, Mark. Also, because we're snazzy out here, added a ticker. Let's go. All right.
We won't say how long we spent getting this ticker going. If you're on Spotify, this means absolutely nothing to you. But
we're not going to talk about how long it took to get that ticker going. All right, moving on to quarterbacks. Number 5 for me is Patrick Mahomes. I think he absolutely deserves to be top 5. I think some people would put him closer to number 1. I just think that, Casey's an absolute powerhouse, but he's losing Tyreek. I think that the competition in his division is going to be really rough to deal with. I mean, every single team's defensive line is very competent. So, you can at least account for 6 games where he's probably going to be struggling. And I think we saw last season that definitely impacts his play when there's a lot of pressure on him, as it does any quarterback, but I digress. Right above that, Justin Herbert. I mean, I think the way that he was playing in the latter half of the season last year was absolutely top 5 talent. I mean, he's incredible. Those 4th down conversions that he had against that last regular season game against the Raiders was just absolutely elite. I couldn't imagine, that much pressure on me as a young quarterback and being able to make it happen time and time again in that game. And I just think that's the kind of clutch potential that you need to really have a winning season and potentially go deep in the playoffs.
Keep in mind, he's younger than us, John.
So crazy, and also making me feel like an old, unathletic turd. Next would be Matt Stafford. His supporting cast it's just going to be, I mean, it's going to be impossible for this dude not to put up incredible numbers. And I just remember, like, as a Lions fan, right, that very first play against the Bears to open up the season, where it was just a dime to Kupp in the opposite side of the field. I think it was like a 50, 60-yard gain. I mean, it was nuts. And it's just like, I think that's going to be all season this season, just like it was last season, basically.
I don't like that one, but we'll get to it.
Well, hey, if there wasn't disagreement in this, then it wouldn't be an entertaining show. So I'm looking forward to it. Number 2, I'd have Josh Allen. I think his production's going to be very similar to what it was last year. And then number 1, the 2-time defending MVP, Aaron Rodgers. his supporting cast looks a little bit different this year, but I also think that's less relevant because of the fact that he's Aaron Rodgers. I think his ball placement is the best in the league. I think that his instincts are just incredible. And to me, he's the number one quarterback in the league. And again, you don't see Tom Brady on this list because I think the dude's past his prime, and I think this is kind of a victory lap for him. So I don't think he's going to have the same kind of production that he has had. Maybe I'm wrong. Tom Brady's really good at proving people wrong, but that's my list. To you, Mark.
All righty. We will have some differences here, so it should get a little spicy, which is fun. I'm going to start here at number 5 with Joe Burrow. You just mentioned Tom Brady. Joe Burrow is the next coming of Tom Brady. He is our generation's Tom Brady. So similar. We've mentioned before in the last episode of how they carry themselves, how they actually move, and how they throw the ball, and how they move up in the pocket or out of the pocket. Like, it's scary. It's like you're watching Tom Brady reincarnated in the younger self. He's number 5. He's going to do phenomenal again this year, build off of last year. Great weapons all around him. The Bengals will be good. He'll be great. Number 4, the GOAT, who somehow, and I don't know how, was left off of John Vocal's list, even in his victory lap, because I agree with you. Tom Brady will not put up the same numbers. He put up MVP numbers last year. You could argue he should have gotten it over Aaron Rodgers all day. I'm not mad about Rodgers getting it, but you could argue it. He won't put up those numbers, John. I agree with you there. But even on his off day and off year, he's a top 5 quarterback, undoubtedly, in this league. There's no way you can name 5 guys you'd rather have on your team right now if you're a GM or a head coach or an offensive coordinator. Tom Brady's that's why he's number 4 for me. I think he will slip a little, but he's got to be in your top 5. It's an interesting take there. Number 3, I have Pat Mahomes. The guy is a young, great talent. He's can do things with his arm that no one else really can do. His mobility is continuing to improve. I think they got offensive line help. As John mentioned, I do agree he'll be running for his life in that division. But with that being said, it'll be a highly competitive division. Every game will probably be high scoring, and we'll see some overtime games. We'll see some 2-minute drives. He'll be putting up some really, really great numbers this year because he has to in order for the Chiefs to make the playoffs and make a Super Bowl push like they expect to. Number 2, I have Aaron Rodgers. Thought about this one a lot. Easily could be my number 1. This guy is just different. You saw in the match, I don't know if anyone watched that, where they competed against Allen and Mahomes. It was Brady and Rodgers in a partner golf thing. Of course, leave it up to Aaron Rodgers for the second year in a row to hit a clutch putt. And as he makes the putt, fist pump. He's just that guy. Aaron Rodgers is him. He is the most talented guy. He has been for a long time. He does things without even trying that everyone else tries their entire career to do and can't do. He'll take a huge hit this year losing Devontae Adams, but he's Aaron Rodgers. He's going to do his thing, and the Packers will be just fine in a bad division. And number 1 is Josh Allen. I think he's my favorite to win the MVP this year. The Bills only got better personnel-wise this year. I think they're going to utilize him in the run game as they have last year. He'll be good doing that. His athleticism continues to show, but his arm talent and what we saw Josh Allen do to the Patriots in the playoffs, what we saw him do to the Chiefs in a game where they should have won in phenomenal fashion. Josh Allen was at the peak of any player in the NFL, and you could argue, even though they didn't make, the last 2 games of the playoffs, he might have been the most impressive player of the NFL playoffs last year, and he's going to build on that. The Bills are going to be really good. I think they're going to dominate that division, and he's going to put up ridiculous numbers this year. Expect an MVP type season from Josh Allen.
That game against the Patriots in the playoffs definitely felt like a new era was just being sounded in with that. It was so cool to watch.
To follow it up, John, with what he did in that game, right? But then to follow up with what he did versus Kansas City. In the NFL playoffs, it's the highest. It's under so much pressure, and to go into an enemy territory like Kansas City, which is not an easy place to play by any means, and do what he did, with the new NFL rules, they win that game. That's all I'm saying.
So when it comes to our disagreements, I'm going to defend Matt Stafford and also talk about this Tom Brady situation. Okay. I would say that Joe Burrow would definitely be like number 6 on my list if we had a 6th. But Matt Stafford's previous nickname before winning a Super Bowl and shutting a whole lot of critics up was Pat Stafford. And the nice part about Pat Stafford is that he's still going to keep putting up those stats, and they're going to be elite top 5 stats. And on top of it, he's going to be winning just like last year. That's why he's number 3 on that list for me. And on top of it, like, I think he did get a little bit reckless with his interceptions towards the latter half of the regular season. If I'm remembering correctly, is when those kind of started to pick up for him. They kind of went for a pretty bad lull in like November or so. But I think, despite interceptions, I mean, his passing yards are going to be insane. He's going to have a large number of touchdowns, and that supporting cast is just too good for him to not put up some incredible numbers.
That's valuable points. However, I think that ranking might be because of the team he's on. If you put him back with Detroit, Joe Burrow was not, he came in as a number 1 pick to Cincinnati and did what Joe Burrow did. Matt Stafford came to Detroit and didn't do anything for about a decade besides stats. So my argument is that if you put any of my 5 guys on the Rams, right, you look at my list, you look at your list, even the other guys on your list on the Rams, they probably all do better than Matt Stafford.
I don't know, Mark. It kind of sounded like you were referencing past season performance for your argument there.
A little bit, but also I think you just, if you put any of these guys in Matt Stafford's role this upcoming season, I think that they would probably outperform him. Now, Matt Stafford, yeah, you know what? He earned the right to be in the conversation there. He definitely proved me wrong, along with a lot of other haters last year. So, I'll let him sit there and be proud, and I'll let you be proud of it. But number 3 is high.
If the Rams win the Super Bowl again next year, I don't know if you can make that argument. So I guess we'll find out. And that's the same reason why Tom Brady's not on this list. Hot take. I don't know if Tom Brady makes it past the first or second round of the playoffs this year.
I agree with you there, actually. I can't bet against Tom Brady. I've done it a few times in my life, and I hate myself for it.
It's a bad situation every time.
You just as I have Tom Brady on my list and how you have him not on your list, you've been added to the Tom Brady prove people wrong list. Your name just got added to it, and he takes that personal. He'll definitely make something happen to prove you wrong. So
I think you're right. And I think that's a valuable point. However, which quarterback beat the other quarterback in the playoffs last year?
Hey,
the stakes were high.
That's a past reference, it seems like to me, John.
You're very right. However, I think that Matt Stafford grabbed that game out of the jaws of death, and everything around him was crumbling, and he went absolute insane person mode and was able to make that happen.
Well, let's not forget how close they came back to coming and winning that game, just like as he did in previous, Super Bowls and stuff. Tom Brady is not a guy you want to leave off your list. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. If he was a boxer, he probably would have never been knocked out ever.
Yeah.
Just
unless he boxed against Matthew Stafford.
All right. Moving on to, I think, defensive lineman now. Yes, defensive lineman. So honestly, I think if he wasn't getting up there in age, Cameron Jordan would even be higher on this list. He's such an underrated defensive lineman. He's not a guy that you hear a lot about. But I just looked it up. Last year, his stats matched Aaron Donald's. He had 38 solo tackles and 12 and a half sacks, right? The dude's a stud on an amazing defensive cast. And I expect him to be a top 5 sack and or solo tackle leader next season as well. Next would be TJ Watt. We had a little bit of debate if he's allowed on this list because he's technically listed as a linebacker. We decided, he's a pass rusher at the end of the day. Dude's a stud. I think he's an absolute staple of the Steelers defense. And there's a reason why, he's got the contract that he's got and why his performance is as high as it is. It's the same as JJ Watt in his prime, man. It's incredible to watch. Next would be Nick Bosa. I think the biggest thing is honestly the defensive scheme just really fits for him, and he's just everywhere all the time on every single play. I think, in a super tough division, he's always just making plays, and I think that that's going to continue into next year. Number 2, I have Myles Garrett. I think that his production's probably going to be pretty close to my number 1, Aaron Donald. I think both of them are just going to have absolutely standout seasons this year. Both of them will probably be in that conversation of leading the leagues in sacks or solo tackles. Mark?
It's a solid list. Don't have many complaints about that one. I start here at number 5 with Maxx Crosby. A little bit biased. Played against Maxx Crosby in college. First play of the game in Mount Pleasant, he had a strip sack, scoop, and score. So didn't think at that moment he'd end up being as big as he is right now, but he got a nice big contract. He's coming off a very productive season. I think he's going to build off of that. I think the Raiders defensive line, they kind of call their defensive scheme based around him. He wreaks havoc on quarterbacks, and he's going to have some talented quarterbacks to go after this year, and he's going to need to step up for them to compete in that division. But I think he will do that. Number 4, I have Myles Garrett. He could arguably be higher, like John has him. Wouldn't complain about it if he was. He's going to be phenomenal, I think, for the Browns. And he's going to have to be, again, like we mentioned, the Deshaun Watson thing. They might have some quarterback problems on the other side. He's going to have to step up. Their defense is going to have to lead him, I think, in some games. And again, in a tough division. But Myles Garrett has done it for a few years. Freak athlete. I mean, if you see the guy, walking around, you wouldn't think that he is from this planet. So Myles Garrett's going to have a big season for them, and the Browns will benefit greatly from that. Nick Bosa at number 3, just like John had. I think John had a great point. The system that he plays in really utilizes him well. He has very good players around him, which help. He's not going to get as many double teams as like an Aaron Donald does or Myles Garrett does. So that benefits him greatly. But he just gets after it, and he plays with a motor that you don't see a lot of guys play with. And when you mix the motor he has with the skill set he has, you get what Nick Bosa is, and that's a highly productive defensive end. TJ Watt, again, yeah, you could argue is a linebacker. I mean, he's a pass rusher at the end of the day. He goes after the quarterback. His job is to make the offense seem chaotic, and he does a very good job of that. Again, you want to talk about freak athletes. Watch this guy do a workout. Doesn't look like he's from this planet. And he just got paid, so he has no reason now. He's going to give everything he has to the Steelers organization, and they are going to need it because I think the Steelers are going to struggle this year on the offensive side of the ball. Clear cut, never a doubt, number 1, Aaron Donald. Just got a very nice compensation package for his previous years of what he's done for the Rams. But Aaron Donald is the best player in football, period, not just defensive line. And he's proven that, and he's done that with his the NFL Top 100. The players vote on that year after year. He's always in the top 2 or 3 players. As a defensive lineman, and especially a guy who plays inside most of the time, to be ranked that high, I mean, you have to really have an effect on the game to be noticed that much, and he does, to say the least. And you watch any live television game of him playing where it's on national TV, all you see is this guy making plays, and the announcers talk about him every other snap. So he's the best player in football. So of course he's going to be the number 1 guy on the defensive line list for me.
Yeah, and I mean, I think comparing these lists, I think that we're, recognizing a lot of the same talents across the league. And it's one of those positions where, you just have those 2 or 3 guys that are just a cut above the rest and just absolutely dominant. So, I'm not sure how much like disagreement or conversation that there is to have here. I think it's uncontested that, all these players that are listed are very serious threats that offenses have to, totally structure their game plan around, because if you don't have these guys blocked play after play after play, they're going to be destroying your quarterback, and you're not going to be gaining any yards. So simple as that.
These are game changing players, season changing players. Like, they'll make plays to win you a game. And for a lineman, a defensive lineman to make a play that will alter the, whether you win or lose consistently, that's hard to do. It's very hard to do. And these guys do it like every other game.
Yep.
So,
and I'll keep going to that thesis of like, if your quarterback has time and the other team's quarterback doesn't, then it's you're in a really good spot to win games. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which is why that division is going to be so hard, John, because The Chiefs, the Chargers, the Raiders, the Broncos all have good pass rushes and all have good quarterbacks. So I don't know what's going to happen,
It's
but
gonna be you could list any version of how those standings are gonna end up to end the season, and I wouldn't disagree with you. I think all four teams could make the playoffs. I
yeah.
mean, it's crazy. So moving on to tight ends, number 5, I got TJ Hockenson. I know that he had a little bit more quiet of a season last season. I think one of the reasons why I have him on this list is because of the fact that the Lions now have a competent receiving core. They have a really good offensive line. Jared Goff, as we know, is a very mid-tier quarterback at best, but I do think that just the offensive situation he is placed in is going to allow him to make plays. It's going to stretch the field up a little more. I think that they're actually going to have to, especially when you get Jameson Williams involved in this, they're going to have a lot of different things to compensate for. And as we know, systems in which you have all of these different weapons is when the tight end actually gets opened up enough to start, making some plays and things like that. I think is a huge impact player for the Lions. I really enjoy watching him play. I think he's a good dude, so that's why he's there. Kyle Pitts is the exact opposite reason on why TJ Hockenson is on this list. I feel like that they don't have an offense whatsoever. They've lost a lot of pieces. They're in a complete rebuild, and this dude's going to get the ball floated to him out of, no other option because of the fact that it's just he's going to be that consistent mismatch guy. And every single time that their offense stutters and starts to look desperate, he's going to be that target. That's just where I think it's going to end up. Oh, somehow I messed up. And huge technical difficulty, accidentally double slided here, but that's fine. Next, I have Darren Waller. I think, same situation. His receiving core is just going to open up. He's like, 8 foot freaking 8. So I think that he's going to have no problem finding mismatches on the defense and capitalizing on them. George Kittle was a stud last year. I think he's going to have super similar production this year. And I just really appreciate the 49er system and how they use their players. I totally just messed something up, so we're just going to go backwards a bunch of times. And then finally, I have Travis Kelce, who just year over year now has been the best tight end in the league. And I think, it sucks that they lost Tyreek, but they also, got Juju Smith, Valdez Scantling. They still have a great receiving core. And I think that Kelce's just going to be that dude for yet another season. On to you, Mark.
Okay. So my tight end list, I want to just give a quick shout out to the tight end position. Probably the hardest position to play professionally in the NFL. You have to do so much, and you have to be able to be a big, strong guy in the inside and push people around. And you also have to be skilled and have finesse like the receivers and running backs do. It's truly the hybrid of those two positions of, offensive line and receiver. And these guys are just freaks. I mean, these are freak of nature players. Number 5, I'm going to start off with is Dawson Knox. Now, obviously, maybe not the biggest name you guys would expect to see on this list, but he's playing with Josh Allen in Buffalo. He had a productive year last year, and what really stands out to me about Dawson Knox is he's a former quarterback in college, so he understands the game at such a high level, and I think that any quarterback can appreciate that. He's going to see things that other tight ends don't. I mean, Rob Gronkowski's of the world aren't exactly smart, right? They're kind of just like airheads that are freaks. But Dawson Knox is a really intelligent player. Again, former QB, and Josh Allen appreciates that. That's why they connect so well in high pressure moments. Number 4, speaking of the devil, there's Gronk. I don't even know if he's going to play this year, but if he is, absolutely has to be on the list. Arguably the best tight end of all time. Playing with Tom Brady again, those guys have a chemistry like not many we've ever seen. You could argue it's up there with Jerry Rice and Joe Montana in terms of best quarterback to receiver tight end combination of all time. And those guys have a lot of touchdowns together. So if he does play, he'll be on the list and could arguably even be higher. But the reason he's at 4 is we're unsure. Number 3, Darren Waller. Like John said, an absolute mismatch. He's a defensive back's nightmare because they're too small to defend him. He's a linebacker's nightmare because he's too fast and too quick to stay with him. He has overcome a lot of things, right? Former drug addict to be able to kind of become who he is, the man he is. Very well known. He's one of the best people in the NFL. Was a Walter Payton Man of the Year. nominee, and I believe he actually won it a couple years ago as well. He's just as good on the field as he is off the field. He's an absolute problem for defenses and deserves to be that high. And then we have my top two, George Kittle, again, for same reasons John said, but really why he's higher than these other guys is he's the best blocker on the list, and it's not even close. George Kittle takes pride in pushing people around. I mean, you can listen to interviews of him talk about it. He'd rather you run the ball. He'd rather say, Coach, give Deebo the ball, and I'm going to put this guy 20 yards downfield on his back, and then I'm going to stand over him as I do it and laugh and point at him like I'm in the WWE. I mean, this guy, he doesn't even belong in the NFL. He belongs on Monday Night Raw, the way that he plays. And, he's just that kind of character. He's an awesome teammate. But then when you watch him, what he's able to do, catching and running after the catch, freak of nature guy. That's why he's that high. And then Travis Kelce's there because he's arguably one of the other, with Gronk and a couple other guys in terms of best tight ends of all time. Another former quarterback, right? So you can, Mahomes and Josh Allen, you can ask those guys about what it's like to throw to former quarterbacks that are tight ends. They have an appreciation for it because they understand how the quarterback position feels to be played. Travis Kelce has all the natural athletic things, but then also has the mind, and he understands the game, and great hands, great route running, great after the catch. And then, like I said, high football IQ. It's the perfect mold for the NFL's top tight end.
Cool. I'd say overall, obviously our top three are exactly the same, and then there's a little bit nuance at 4 and 5. I'd say Gronk didn't make my list because I'm not sure if he's going to play this year. And I think Dawson Knox on your list was a great pick. I think that that makes a ton of sense, and I think he's probably going to have an even bigger year this year than he did last year. So yeah, I mean, this position's tough because you do just have those kind of standout guys, and then everybody else is sort of on the same level. But I think that both Hockenson and Pitts are set up for some pretty solid seasons collectively some pretty solid seasons coming up here.
Yeah.
Cool. And then lastly, I'm just fat fingering the slideshow like crazy, so I apologize. Just forget how to press right arrow. Moving on to running backs. So number 5 for me is Alvin Kamara. I think one thing that I really like about the way that Alvin is used inside of the Saints offense is he's not like a Derrick Henry where it's like, here's the ball, go run over 80 people and shorten your career. And then, when you're injured and can't really do anything and, whatever, it's not like he's going to have this longevity problem, right? He receives the ball a lot. Their protection up front for him is really great. He isn't the type to just go and try to run through people and truck people. He has the ability to do that and the athleticism to do that, but that's just not his play style. So for that reason, I think, yet again, he's going to be a top 5 running back in the league. And I appreciate the fact that there is some longevity with him at that position as a Saints fan. Next is Dalvin Cook. I think that the Vikings are kind of in this weird spot where coaching change, which is always tough. And there's probably going to be, a little bit of restructuring that has to go down, but man, their offense is just ready to go. So I'm really looking forward to seeing his season. I think is so long as he can stay healthy, just like, the rest of these guys that I put on this list, he's definitely going to be a top 5 running back. Next, we have Derrick Henry. Again, big contingency would be his health, but assuming he's back to his former form, the last couple of seasons, he's just unstoppable. I mean, his size, his speed, it's a problem. Even with the Titans, I'd say having one of, not a bad offensive line, but, maybe one of the weaker offensive lines out of some of the other supporting casts of the running backs on this list here. He's just an absolute freak of nature. Next is Nick Chubb. And the reason why I have him at number 2 is because of the fact that I think the Browns are going to be dealing with some major quarterback issues. But what they do have is a solid protection up front. And then they also just, have enough receiving talent to take pressure off of him. And I think he's just going to be getting a lot of handoffs. It's exactly what happened when Baker started dealing with injury issues last year, is they just started relying on Chubb to carry the ball a lot more. So just something to keep in mind there from a scheme perspective, and why I think he's probably going to have, a very productive year, just like he did last year. And finally, I have Jonathan Taylor. I think he was the best running back in the league last year, and I think he's due to have that same kind of production this year. I'd say the Colts probably out of everybody on this list have the best offensive line. I think that their entire offensive scheme is pretty much based on Matt Ryan, like, just don't screw up, just like do what we need you to do, and we're just gonna play good hard-nosed football and win some games. Mark?
Yeah, that's a solid list, John. Don't have much to disagree. I'll have some points about it, but we'll get there when we compare.
Sounds good.
My number 5, I have Aaron Jones, which, I thought about this for a little while. He shares time with some other backs in Green Bay. They really do that running back by committee style, which is why his numbers are sometimes not as high as these other guys like that John had on his list. But when you look at just what Aaron Jones does for the Packers in terms of catching the ball in the backfield, he does that just as good as anybody in the league. And Aaron Rodgers needs that because with how they utilize the play action game, a lot of the times Aaron Rodgers hits his check down and gets the ball in space to these guys, and Aaron Jones is really hard to tackle in space and puts up numbers even though he does have that running back by committee style. So that, and because of their scheme, is why I have him there. Number 4, I have similar reasons, Austin Eckler, because Justin Herbert, again, getting him the ball throwing. He's phenomenal out of the backfield, catching the ball, making people miss, finding ways to make incredible plays happen out of nothing. But he's also a good downhill runner he's an undersized running back, and his ability to find ways to get positive yards. 30. You mentioned earlier, John, Justin Herbert converting on 4th and down. A lot of those were Austin Eckler catching those, and they also utilized him to run the ball and get those as well. So the ability for him to do both, he's a red zone weapon. All those reasons, he deserves to be on this list. Number 3, I have Jonathan Taylor, right? John had him at number 1. Jonathan Taylor belongs, in the top 2 or 3 for sure on this list. Was the leading rusher last year, obviously. This year, I think that he will compete for that spot again. They got better offensively up front, and he'll just, they're going to ride with him. They're going to ride behind him. He's just going to be their, he's going to be their rock, right? He's going to carry the ball, and if he plays well, the Colts are going to have a pretty good season. And I completely agree with John said about their game plan. Matt Ryan just needs to manage the game, which I think he's more than capable of doing as a veteran guy. He's not as shaky as Carson Wentz was. So the job is just to not lose games, right? Go out and win games, run behind Jonathan Taylor. Another side note, played against Jonathan Taylor in college as well at Wisconsin. Absolute grown man against us. They beat us like 60-something to 0, and I think he had 6 touchdowns and like 450 yards. So video game numbers, and it was embarrassing watching that, seeing what he's able to do against other grown
I
men.
wish I get to say that I played against Jonathan Taylor. I mean, come on.
It was cool, but when you look up at the scoreboard, it wasn't so cool.
At the time, right? You're like, man, this kind of stinks.
Yeah, it wasn't as fun as it sounds. Number 2, I have Alvin Kamara. John had him lower. I have him up higher again, just because I think he's going to have a bounce back year. He didn't have a down year by any means last year, but I think he missed some games, and the Saints struggled a little bit. They had quarterback issues, they had injury issues all over the place. I think the Saints bounced back, and John's predicted this, and I'm starting to agree with him more and more on this prediction that the Saints will be a team to deal with in the NFL this year. He's going to be a big part of the reason why. Again, he can run the ball downhill, make people miss, run you over, and can catch the ball in the backfield just as good as anyone on this list. That's why I have him so high, is he's able to do everything you need. And at his high, he's arguably the best running back in the NFL. Number 1, I have King Derrick Henry. It's hard to argue with it. I mean, when you put on film of him and you see him stiff arm, you see him jump over people, you see him lower his shoulder, you see him somehow separate from guys that are a half of his size, speed wise. It's you're not supposed to be able to do that. You talk about aliens from a different planet. He's one of them. And if he stays healthy, there's no better back in the league. What he could work on, though, and why there's some debate potential there with these other guys is, like I said, he needs to be better out of the backfield catching the ball. He's not bad by any means, but if he can become more consistent doing that and maybe a little bit more of a crisp route runner, he'll be clear cut the number 1 guy.
And, I think that's a great point, Mark, is because, like, the way that we're grading this, I do think, like, the running backs' attributes as far as some of their other abilities with receiving the ball and things like that have a huge impact on where they end up on this list. And Derrick Henry, I would say, out of this list of guys, is just the most like traditional ground and pound, run right through you, absolutely dominant athletically type of running back. Like it's just here's the ball, go murder people, and that's kind of his play style.
Completely
And
agree. One thing I'll say, John, which is, and I'm just noticing this, but we just you just talked about the value of catching the ball in the backfield, right? And like how that matters. Neither of us have Christian McCaffrey on this list. And that just goes to show how important it is to be consistent with your health in this game and especially in this league. He is by far the number 2 or 3, at least, on a lot of people's number 1 on this list if healthy, but he has been so inconsistent with his health that he's not even in our top 5. And we're just assuming that he won't be able to stay healthy. That's sad. Obviously you don't wish that upon anyone in the league, but it's the truth, man. Like if you can't go out there and play Sunday, then how are you going to, help our team, right?
right. And I genuinely think that like that's kind of what informed, where some of these guys that we have the same names on my list ended up is because of the fact that it's like, yeah, like you can be the best running back in the league, like Christian McCaffrey has been at times over his career. But it doesn't matter if you can only finish a half a season. And like we started to see that with Derrick Henry. And it is a bummer. Like, I mean, football is an incredibly physical sport, is incredibly physically demanding. It's, arguably, maybe next to UFC, the most violent sport that you can play. And the running back position is the one that bears the brunt of that in most situations now. It's like we've changed the game in so many ways to protect players because of how violent of a sport it is. But the running back position is the one position where it's kind of harder to get away from that. Like the way it's designed is get the ball and run. Like it's tough.
It's repeated beatings, right? It's repeated hits to the head. It's repeated hits to, whatever. You have a deep bone bruise on your knee or your leg. You're getting hit there 5-6 times, a quarter. So it's hard for those little nagging injuries to heal. And then when you have big time injuries like Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry had last year, you're out, you're missing a lot of time. And it's hard to replace guys like that. There's just not many of them. So I completely agree there. I have a couple things with your list. I'll say, Nick Chubb's he does a fine job in Cleveland, but I just say he will split time with Kareem Hunt, which is why I think his production might maybe not be as a top 2 guy. No problem with him being on your list though. And then Dalvin Cook, for the same reasons we just said about Henry and McCaffrey, injury prone, right?
Yep.
So those are my only two things that I would say, but I don't have a problem with anything on your list. Maybe just Chubb being a little bit too high there. And Dalvin Cook, if healthy, arguably could be a top 3 guy on for the running back position. So
yeah, and a fair point. And honestly, I mean, same thing. It's like the guys that you list, are right there. I mean, Eckler is just so athletic. He's absolutely incredible. And one final comment that I want to make as we wrap up this episode here about this running back thing is this Deebo situation, right? I think he is completely valid in the reasoning on why he wants to hold out here because he's getting used like a running back and he sees what that does to people's careers, right? So he's like, you're either going to pay me an absurd amount of money that makes me okay with shortening my career, or we have to restructure how you use me as an athlete because it is literally, I might not make it to the next contract because of the fact that I'm too beat up to continue playing. And I think the fact that a receiver has actual like trepidation about how he's being utilized on offense in the sport that he's paid millions of dollars to play already because of the fact that he has to get some handoffs. Like
sounds
it's
to me like it does. Listen, I completely agree with you. It's a country club problem to have, right? Like I'm so good at both these positions that I want to pick to not run the ball as much because I want to play this game longer and make a bajillion dollars. Like, and listen, his logic is there though. Look at the receivers who just got paid: Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs. They all just got paid, right? The running backs aren't getting paid like that. It's a simple game. He knows if he stays and it slides more in terms of a running back in that hybrid position, if he's more of a running back than a receiver, and he does take a beating like he did this year, like he's got 3-4 years left max of productive football. if he plays more like Cooper Kupp does and like the Stephon Diggs and like these other guys, he's got another 8 to 9 years left,
It
right?
could
So
literally add a decade to his career.
yeah, which is a
So
lot of money and a lot of,
it could be
potential.
$100 million,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
With the way
no,
that
I mean,
receivers are getting paid, that could be $100 million business decision.
completely. So, he's not crazy for what he's doing, and people can complain about it. Again, it is a country club problem. It's like, what's the difference between all these millions and then the hundreds of millions? But, he's got a point, and I agree with you, and I agree with what he's doing. I think they'll work it out.
I think so
He's
too.
definitely he's still going to be used as that hybrid weapon. It's just not going to be, they're going to protect him a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think the 49ers did draft running back pretty high up, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, I mean, they do that running back by committee style, like Green Bay and like some of these other teams do, but he's just so much better than everybody. So it's
He
like we
is.
want to get the
He is.
ball in our guys' hands. I mean, I don't blame the 49ers either. Like, hey, Deebo, you're the best player, arguably in football when the ball's in your hands. Like, we want to give you the ball. So sorry for trying to give you more touches. Like, I don't know what.
Right. It's a weird problem, but if you actually
Yeah,
think about the logic behind it, it does make a lot of sense.
yeah.
So anyways, just we're coming up on an hour here. I just want to again say I appreciate anybody that's made it this far and listening to our opinions on this stuff. We're super excited for the next few months to see the season going and hopefully be able to exercise our networks a little bit to get some interesting guests and have some awesome conversations with that. So really appreciate everybody's attention, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the support, and any feedback is always appreciated as well.
Sir, trying to grow and improve this thing always. You guys have a good one.